Hi, I'm Rob.
And I'm Rob.
And this is Ask Rob and Rob.
Welcome to Ask Rob and Rob. Thank you for joining us for 2 more listener questions and 2 more answers. Those questions coming up in just a sec, but it's so easy, Rob, to send your question our way.
The easiest way to do it is go to propertyhub.net/ask, where you will find our telephone number that you can leave a message on, or you can leave a message directly on that page, and you can get a link to where you could submit your question for the Sunday Times, because Rob and I answer your questions each and every week in the home section of the Sunday Times. So make sure you check us out there. Our first question today comes in from John.
Hi, Rob and Rob. John here from Ireland. Thanks a million for all the great content you guys put out and great services you offer to the public. Just had a question regarding ROI and how you calculate it when you've had an investment for a period of time. So, to give an example, I have an apartment which I have taken all my initial investment out of. So, currently if I was to do an ROI calculation, there's no money in there, so it's essentially infinity. So obviously that's a poor approach. Just wondering how best to approach that when you're trying to compare properties with different amounts of cash still left in them. Do you just value it at today and pretend you were investing in it for the first time today, or what do you guys feel is the best approach there? Thanks a million. Bye-bye.
Thank you, John. Glad we are having listeners over in Ireland as well. Lovely to have you and everyone else who listens around the globe. Right, let's give you some value. How do you calculate ROI in this example? Well, you've got an infinite ROI in the truest sense, because you've put your money in and you've been able to get it out. So the ROI is infinite. You've done a great job here. Your money has worked incredibly hard for you, so hard that you took it out. How do you then judge it? Personally, I don't. I look at ROI when I'm making an investment. And of course, I'll consider it a few years in once all the costs have settled to see how it's performed. But I don't continue to look at ROI. I'll then assess it on how much it's grown in capital values over the year. I'll assess it on the rental return I'll get, but I don't continue to look at ROI. ROI for me, your return on your investment, is a tool to help you make a purchase. So you use ROI, amongst other things, to go, okay, based on these numbers, I'm happy with my return on investment. If I put this money in, what am I getting out? And like I've said, you can assess it after a year to see, okay, what were the acquisition costs? What did it actually play out to be? And see if your numbers were correct. But I don't continue to look at ROI from that point on. You can, and there's nothing stopping you to carry on looking at ROI. I just don't think it's that useful. For me, my assessment comes down to capital growth that year and rental return. And if you put the two together, then that would be called the total return. So your rental return and your capital growth return combined equals your total return. So it's different calculations for different scenarios and different stages of your portfolio. That's how I do it, John, but you're welcome to approach it a different way. But whatever you do, well done on that investment. It sounds like you did a cracking job.
Okay, let's hear now from Mark.
Hi, Rob and Rob. My name is Mark. I'm from the Midlands. Just giving a quick call as I have a question to ask that I don't think has been covered by the podcast yet, which is a bit of a rarity nowadays. So I found myself in a bit of a strange situation as a landlord. So a bit of background. We have one buy-to-let and we've currently had it rented through an agency that's helping us out. And it's rented to 2 adults, a family, a daughter and father. Now, due to some unfortunate circumstances, the father has recently passed away, leaving the daughter being the sole occupier of the property. I'm not sure what the implications are going to be, whether she will take over the contract for it or whether, of course, the estate of the deceased, if there's going to be any rent owing from that, will have to be settled after the will, because there's a lot of misinformation on there. After a quick Google, I found myself with more questions than I had answers. They've been fantastic tenants, so I want to try and be as empathetic as I can, but also pragmatic as to the potential of what's to come. And if at all possible, I'd love to keep the tenant. Of course, with everything going on and the bereavement, it's a bit of a delicate situation, but any experience you have perhaps in this area would be greatly appreciated. Thanks again for all the great content, and I look forward to hearing from you.
Mark, it is a really tricky situation. I'm sorry you're having to deal with it. But the answer is relatively straightforward. So if you had a situation where the sole tenant on the tenancy agreement had died, then the tenancy doesn't automatically end. It carries on as normal until somebody ends it, but the rights and the obligations in that tenancy become part of that person's estate. So normally what would happen is the executors of the will would want to bring the tenancy to an end because they don't need the property anymore after a certain period of sorting it out. So they would then ask you to release them early from the tenancy, and you would be happy, presumably, for that to happen. In this case, you've got two people living there, and it sounds like both of them are named on the tenancy agreement. So I presume it's an adult daughter. So in that situation, the tenancy continues with her as the only tenant. So nothing changes, and it's her responsibility to continue paying the rent. So really, what you're going to need to establish is she going to want to continue living there? Is she going to be able to continue to afford paying the rent on her own? Obviously, I don't know in what proportions they were each contributing. If she does want to stay there and she can afford to, then the tenancy just carries on, nothing for you to do. But if she doesn't, she can't afford it, or she wants to move elsewhere, then again, she may ask you to release her from the tenancy early, and you, of course, would be happy for that to happen. So it's really relatively straightforward. The tricky part, of course, is navigating it in a sensitive way. You don't want to leap onto it and start questioning her about her plans straight away. But equally, you don't want to leave it too long, because if she just isn't in a position to deal with it and it goes on for too long, then she could end up in arrears, which would then be very difficult for you to recover. So getting the timing and the tone of the conversation right is hard, and you need to approach it sensitively. But it sounds like you definitely are doing that. And hopefully with a bit of knowledge now, you'll be able to come to the best outcome for everyone. Thank you for those questions. We'll be back to answer more questions next week, and we'll be answering questions in the Sunday Times, of course, on Sunday. But before then, we'll see you for the Property Podcast on Thursday. Until then, have a great week. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.